Welcome everyone to CLC's Why Making Still Matters, our second online vendor expo. Thank you all for joining us. For those of you who are just coming on, I'm Jennifer Keohane. As you can see, I am not in Connecticut, but happy to be joining you here today. We're really happy that you're joining us, and so many of you have signed up. We recently had a strategic planning survey that went out, and it was really one of the things that was striking is that so many of you were thinking forward and excited about revisiting your makerspaces or creating makerspaces. So this event seems to be particularly timely. As you know, we recently awarded a new library supplies bid, and we expanded it to include maker and STEAM materials. So later on, as part of this event, you'll have a chance to meet our new vendors that are on that. So let me just tell you a little bit about what's going to happen today. The schedule is as follows. We're going to do our keynote panel conversation. And at 2:45, we'll have exclusive time in the expo hall for you to meet, to visit, and learn from all of our vendors. I want to give you a quick orientation to hop in. So on the left pane, there's a picture menu that will guide you through to the different components of the event. So we're on the stage right now. And when it's time, you're going to click on the expo at 2:45 to visit the vendor hall. On the right-hand side, if you click, you'll see that there's a chat. So feel free to put your questions in during the chat. You'll see that Amanda's already started that off. One last thing, I wanted to remind you that there's some things to remember when you're visiting the vendors. You need to click on the blue Share Audio and Video button to video chat with them. And on the right sidebar, be sure to toggle from this chat tab to the offer to sign into the vendor booths. This is extremely important so the vendors will know that you visited them. Think of this like a sign-in sheet at your school library. So that's all the housekeeping. I'm going to try to remind you again at the end of this, and I'm hoping you'll get the most out of this day. But for now, I'm very excited to bring you a panel of 3 Connecticut makers and leaders in the maker community from Connecticut. We asked them here today to have a panel discussion to talk about really that question of why making still matters. And it's hard. I know people have been distracted with COVID and some of the, obvious restrictions and the changes that you've had to deal with over the past year and a half. But we are going to be focusing again and sort of back to doing things to foster learning in our community, and making is certainly part of that. So let me briefly introduce who's joining us today. And so we have Mike Kaltschnee, who's from Danbury Hackerspace. Mike is the co-founder of the Danbury Hackerspace. He's a serial entrepreneur. His 5th startup, Ready Element, is an Amazon AWS consulting partner, and he's building high-end web and mobile applications. Second, I'm going to introduce J.R. Logan from MakeHaven. He's the co-founder and executive director of MakeHaven, which, if you haven't visited, is a nonprofit makerspace and fab lab in New Haven, Connecticut. JR has a history of nonprofit leadership at the United Way and in New Haven, and he currently serves on the board of the Eli Whitney Museum. He's earned a master's degree in public affairs from the School in Public Environmental Affairs at Indiana University with a focus on nonprofit management. And finally, let me introduce you to Devra Sisitsky. Devra's a native Hartford, returned to Greater Hartford area after many years of living in Boston and Washington, D.C. She spent over 20 years owning a consultancy, assisting hospitals to create a suburban presence with the development of walk-in centers, mammography, and surgical centers. She continued to work and transitioned into managed care and designed Hartford's first PPO. Devra has then established a niche newspaper called The Homesteader, which had a family-oriented audience, and she's also known as a serial entrepreneur. She's impassioned about changing society from one conspicuous consumption to a culture of innovation and making. And I know her best from when she was first starting and had a vision for a making space in Connecticut called Makerspace Connecticut. It has since opened up in Hartford. She's turned it into a reality, and Makerspace Connecticut is a community resource open to the public, offering classes for all types. So I'm actually going to stop with the formal and turn it over to each one of them to ask them to tell a little bit more about themselves and to talk more about just exactly their makerspaces. And I'm going to kick off with JR.
All right. Well, happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me and being interested in what our experience has been. So our makerspace started in 2012. It started mostly with folks in the tech startup industry. A few had seen other makerspaces in the big cities. And I was running a meetup group where we were just getting together and talking about technology and social change. We started having folks bringing in 3D printers, other things, Bitcoin miner. I wish I'd jumped in. And the talk came around about, well, maybe we should take the groups of people we were meeting and actually have a place where we could do it. This ended with a group of folks getting together and actually putting in money before we even had a space. And following that, we did the paperwork and somebody gave us a place at a very decent rate. And we brought in some sawhorses and doors for our first tables. And from that group of 12 to 20, we grew to 30, and the next year 40, and the next year like 60. And now, well, since 2012, we're almost 10 years later, and we're at almost 400 members. And in the later years, it grew faster. And that's because we've been able to add to, just a couple of soldering irons and a couple of doors on sawhorses to the point where we've been able to attract some pretty significant funds to buy great equipment. And we've attracted volunteers. We have an incredible group of over 20 people now who commit to at least 3 hours of, on-site time where they are mentoring or badging in our nomenclature, which really means checking people out to make sure that they're ready and competent to use a particular tool. And those volunteers have been one of the surprises to me. I envisioned the space, I envisioned the tools, but I hadn't quite envisioned how willing people would be to regularly commit themselves to helping others. And the folks that do it have given us feedback that it's been really enriching for them. And so we've benefited in all of those ways. I'll share in the chat if folks want to just see some sense of what our space is like. It is over 10,000 square feet. It's grown up organically. We had a move about 3 years ago. We have a separated woodworking shop. We have a textiles area in the center of our space. We have home brewing that happens. We've recently added a community biology lab for like citizen science learning. We have a machine shop that has plastics and metalworking, so welding and other items like that. We have a small room for photography and general media. We're also going to turn it into some sound production capabilities. We have some desks that folks can rent. If they have a startup, they have to apply. They have to prove that they're a maker, but then they can get a desk space. And we have a large area of storage, which is one of the things. If you're planning a makerspace with an ongoing large project, you're going to have to think about storage, and probably more than you want to. So that is a high-level overview of our origin and what we have. I'll pass it on to my colleagues.
Sure. Devra, would you like to chime in and tell us a little bit about your makerspace?
Absolutely. Yeah. So unlike JR's, I was really excited about organic growth, but I had to be more determined about it. I learned about the maker movement in 2014, And I was enthralled because my perceptions as a mother at that point with a child that was, in high school and really trying to discern what it was that he was going to go into, evolved with a close inspection of makerspaces. I was thrilled to learn about the maker movement because I thought, finally, common sense. Years ago, you worked on cars with your friends in the neighborhood. There were ham operators. People did things. But for so long, we encouraged every child to go into IT. And there were a lot of really great theoretical engineers, but not a lot of people that were swinging wrenches and had experience. So my feelings about the maker movement were born out of a feeling of change in what was going on with our culture. At the same time, as I was learning about it, I visited about 20 different makerspaces, and I decided that there are very different makerspaces. There are hobbyist spaces filled with passion and groups of people going together with enormous amount of resiliency to make a space occur. And then there were other spaces at the time that were more planned out and more commercial. In my viewing of a lot of different makerspaces around the country, I thought there has to be a hybrid. There has to be a larger makerspace with a legacy of learning and work skill development that's organic and people that are impassioned and excited to be there, and simultaneously somebody's job to clean at night, to put all the tools in the shop that they belong. So I signed a lease on our space here in Hartford on Main Street in the G. Fox building, about a little over 25,000 square feet, a little under 30,000 square feet back in on November of 2017, and did a huge build out. So I decidedly went out and raised several $1 million to move forward with our makerspace. We have 10 unique shops, a professional wood shop. We have a CNC shop with Haas and a bunch of Bridgeports and a lathe. So there's manual equipment, metal fabrication with welding, blacksmithing. We have plasma cutter. We have plastics. I decided that we were going to be an additive manufacturing center of excellence. We have textiles. We have soldering. We have classes in virtual reality, artificial intelligence, electronics, Arduino. We have a podcast studio. We have an assembly area. Many of the same things that JR has. It was just very important for me to have this space where we could break down barriers. Our mission was to positively impact lives by enabling access, education, and innovation. And the only way to racial equity is to break down those barriers to access information, get to those tools. And that was what was really important for us to do. So we moved ahead with classes initially in the makerspace. Many of our classes right now are totally free to our members. We get a lot of sponsorship. We were one of the first in the state to offer digital badging for our additive manufacturing program. So again, to talk about access, it's a program that we offer 2 nights a week for people that are already working. It's 2.5 hours. We offer credentials or digital badges. We break up the information in about 15 to 20 hours. And then provided they pass through that section well, they'll get a digital badge or a credential. It's pretty exciting to see where people are going and what they're doing. We're doing this in CAD, where we just started working with a lot of the area high schools and students with programs in CAD, laser. It's just really exciting because there are so many alternative pathways to financial stability. And it was important for us to be able to highlight those and bring those to the greater Hartford area.
Cool. Mike, your makerspace is kind of near a library. Do you want to talk more about Danbury?
Sure. Like JR, we were seeing the maker movement happening on sites like Hackaday, and I was traveling the country, so I got to see spaces that were emerging all over the country. And I think I first met JR in Boston at Artisans Asylum, I think there's 7 of the Hackerspace founders were up there for that weekend. Make a makerspace, a great place called Artisans Asylum. Our story is kind of weird. Danbury, the downtown Danbury is a mess, and the mall came in and it was great for taxes, but it wiped out our main street. So, I left my last startup. It was a VC funded startup, December 31st, 2011, and the first week of January, John Gachel, my co-founder, and I started looking for space. And we were going to do what a lot of spaces do, is just be a club. And our vision evolved. We were going to rent some warehouse space and do it as a co-op. And we were driving down Main Street one night, and we said, wouldn't it be great if we put it down here? And we had no idea that we'd have members from 35 different towns, especially a lot of people from New York State, coming to downtown Danbury to access the equipment. So January 2012, we had the idea. February, we had the, I bumped into the mayor, Mayor Mark, who's now the Commissioner of Revenue Services for the state, for Vermont. I bumped into him and said, hey, we're starting a makerspace. And we call him the Twitter mayor. He actually knew what one was and said, I'm on it, work with me. I started another nonprofit 30 years ago. So I knew that the city had a lot of buildings. I didn't know they owned 60 buildings. So they gave the Danbury Area Computer Society group I started about 30 years ago free space. I didn't know they'd give us a crazy building. So in March, we went in and pitched him. So January 2012 idea, February bump into the mayor, March put my team together, put our vision together, and they gave us an old bank that's physically attached to the library for $1 per year. Not only did they do that, but Mark's vision was amazing. He said, we're not just going to give you the building. We're going to put $500,000 into renovating the building to your specification. They completely gutted the building and built the space. During that time, we worked out of bars, we worked out of city center's offices, and we built our community over the year and a half, year and 3 quarters it took for them to gut and renovate the building. I had 50 people at a bar, kids and all, for maker events and meetups. And so anyway, so we opened, and our vision sort of coalesced into an incubator model, where we work with a lot of startups. We have free office hours for entrepreneurs with a patent attorney. We have product designers, toy designer from Melissa and Doug, who sits and works with people for free. And we've spawned companies like Noteworthy Chocolates, which now is, I have the coolest job in the world, like Devra and JR. People come in and go, hey, I've got an idea. Well, this guy came in and said, I want laser chocolate. And this is 6 years ago. And we lasered some chocolate, and now his company, he's raised money on a 7-figure valuation. Okay, and he's just now has a partnership with a big food service company. So anyway, at that time, I wanted to do some summer camps. And since we're in the library building, we have a great partnership with Michelle Capizella, Lambert Shell, and now the 2 Katies that run the Danbury Library. And what's funny is I was trying to do too much. I had my other startup, and Lambert looked at me and went, man, you're a mess. So he took one of his positions, okay, and he hired someone named Aurelio Maraca, okay, as the technical coordinator. And Aurelio pushes me pretty hard. He's a great guy. At that point, JR, you were at our first Steam Fair. We've run 9 of them since. Aurelio goes, hey, 1 Steam Fair a year isn't enough, so let's do 2. And I stupidly said yes in a moment of weakness. And so we get about 2,000 people attending, about 40, 50 exhibits. It's a fun, interactive day for kids. So we run 9 Steam Fairs together. My crew teaches 3D design, app programming. We have a Girls Who Code group. We have all these things are done in partnership with Aurelio and me, causing trouble. The coolest thing too was one of my neighbors came in and said, would you like to do something with kids? And I said, I'd love to do a maker camp. Make Magazine had just started maker camps. This is like 6 years ago. And she goes, well, what would you do? And I explained it to her, and she wrote a check for the first 3 years. And then she turns to me and goes, what else would you do? And I said, I'd run, a robotics camp. And she said, okay, I'll fund that too. And so the next thing I know, the Buck Foundation, who's up in Hartford, at the Science Center, they run the Teen Innovation Program. Danbury was the second location for that. So before COVID, we had 170 kids go through our summer camps that we started and collaboratively started running together. A lot of my guys are the teachers, instructors for these camps. I love my team, and it's been a great partnership. We are closed officially because our space is too small. We are looking to reopen at the end of May, if all goes well. And we're aggressively looking to build a larger facility. That's been our vision since probably 2012. And we've learned a lot from JR and from Devra. That said, we all work together. We're all friendly with each other. And solidarity, I'm wearing one for the Watertown space that couldn't be here. But wherever you are in the state, there are makerspaces, Nesit, and where's Nesit? Meriden. There's Cure, not Cure Labs. There's Spark in New London. So they're all over the state. There's what, 7 or 8 of us at this point? So,
yep.
So anyway, so that's it. It's been a great collaboration. We love working with librarians. You guys have even made me think about wanting to get a tattoo. I think that's a requirement to be in a library, right? So most of the librarians in Danbury are tattooed. So.
So I think for those of us who are watching, you can see that there's similarities and there's differences, and all of the makerspaces sort of have, have taken similar, but then some different paths. I wanted to ask this panel, what do you think is the value of a makerspace to a community and to our state?
JR, you want to start?
Sure. Well, I think that we are at an important time in history where the revolution of the internet and YouTube and all of this information being so quickly available has meant that there's just this acceleration and the availability of technologies that can matter. So we are moving to a point where there's a lot more opportunity for entrepreneurship. There are opportunities even in the job market for shifting skills. And that means that adults, as well as kids, need to be retrained and reschooled and understand what is necessary to be successful in that economy. But more than in that economy, just to feel that sense of being able to be creative and to build things and to discover things. I mean, these are never stop learning. And makerspaces are places that encourage that free-form behavior. I think that the thing about a makerspace is it's a lot about discovery rather than about a really strict linear path or guided thing to follow. That we have guideposts and we have helpers along the way, but the destination is uncertain. And often it's a much better destination because each step you take, you get a little more perspective on what you like, what you enjoy, what tools are out there. And we don't ask you to know all of that up front. We bring you on a journey.
Other thoughts from the panel? That was so well put, JR.
Yeah, I agree. I echo everything JR said, and well said, JR. I think I'll take it because I'm not a maker, and I know JR is a gifted maker and amongst other things, so I'll take it from more of a community perspective. I think we're all in cities, and cities have definitely undergone a lot of change here through COVID. Many of us transitioned to doing so many things online. We reopened our space June 2nd with safe shops, and we haven't had any incidents. We're very grateful, but we reduced our capacities tremendously, put plexiglass up everywhere, bleaching everyone, everything, whatever, thermometers, everything that you need to reopen. But I think it's also incumbent upon us because we still are a community space. And I don't know how you guys did, but our space grew tremendously since we opened in June. I think people are still looking for avenues for that creativity. So I think we are a space where people can still sort of find that reduced capacity, community, and interaction. I think that's important. I echo wholeheartedly what JR talked about different pathways, that there are so many different pathways. And I see what we do as an on-ramp to expose people to a lot of different modalities, a lot of different technology, and crack open minds to think things are possible. Again, I think many times we're a destination, and in downtown Hartford, when I see those other 3 people on the street these days, it's painful, but we're a destination, and a lot of people are coming in to the makerspace to work on things. So I think there's, it's important for us because things are going to crack open. Aerospace is going to reopen again. People are going to start moving. And I think it's even more incumbent upon us and our spaces to be here to help prepare people. And the library spaces as well. There's an important job that we have an opportunity right now to rest up and gather our strength and make our strategy, because we got a lot of work that's going to crack right open very soon in front of us.
Yeah, I love that one to JR because I've heard him speak before, and I knew that was his sweet spot. And I'd like to echo what Devra and JR said as well. When we opened, we really didn't know who would show up or what would happen. It's sort of like you build it, they'll come. And we realized we could really service entrepreneurs in a unique way. There's SCORE in our building. They have an office. The SBDC, Nelson Merchant, works out of our space, for appointments and using it for events. But a lot of people come into our space and don't even know how to begin the journey, or they're going down the wrong path. And so one of the things we found was when someone wanders in, and like one of the first guys that came in, he came in with an idea and he had spent $5,000 with one of those invention places on TV. And the first thing I said was, have you protected the idea? He said, I mailed a notarized letter to myself, and that's not how you protect it. You file a provisional patent. And we have created sort of a think tank. So it was a Thursday night, our open house. So I said, Will, who's an attorney, could you explain provisional patents to him? In the meantime, I did a Google patent search, found his idea was already patented. And I was like, sir, please do not spend a dime on this company. They are ripping you off. We spent, and even worse, we physicist, his idea would work. This would not work. It was a heated leaf blower to melt the snow in your driveway. Under certain conditions, it will create ice and make it worse. So we found that by having the office hours and by referring people back and forth to SCORE, building prototypes for people, we do that for a lot of companies in the area, we can help the community. During downturns is when a lot of companies start, and giving them the ability to have access to attorneys, business attorneys, to prototyping equipment. All of us have lasers and 3D printers and CNC routers, and getting them the training to be able to use that. Or even, building an app, a prototype app with App Inventor, very cheaply and cleanly, So one of the things we see is we're a real resource for entrepreneurs in the area, and be able to refer them also to other places. So where they can get help.
So thank you, Mike. What do you see as the overall trends in making and makerspaces in Connecticut and beyond? I mean, I know, every one of you has had your makerspace impacted with COVID, but yet I know there's still a lot of things going on. What do you sort of see as the trends coming down the pike?
I'll jump in unless somebody else wants to. I mean, from my perspective, I see a lot of integration happening with other services and with other entities like libraries, where makerspaces were the new kids on the block, and it was unclear how our services and the interactions might happen between us and a library, or between us and a community of artists, or between us and a group that cares about entrepreneurship. As we have had people come through the program and things have organically happened that are stories, that are tangible, that feel real to people, that those connections, that network is becoming more clear. So I think a mark for me is the maturing of it, not just by itself, but as a player within an ecosystem. We're far from fully mature. We're more like teenagers that are still figuring it out very much in that way. But that's one of the remarkable parts is integrating it into all the other services and ideas that are happening concurrently and have been happening historically.
I guess if we're going in sequence, I'll jump in. And if you guys are teenagers, then I guess we're just toddling about. But I think one of the things that I noticed tremendously is collaboration, and we're very open to collaboration. Just looking at it from a different perspective, very much the way JR is. We work a lot with the universities and colleges that are in the area. We work with Capital Workforce Partners. I think some of the things that we've seen in this area is our ability to jump in even with COVID, we were able to flip a switch like everybody else. And we started producing face shields. And we immediately noticed in early March that we had a responsibility to our community. And if larger manufacturers couldn't change right away, we could jump in and fill that space, you know, and get face shields to the doctors that were out of them, that were intubating. So it's very much the same thing that you know, I feel now is that we're collaborating, because maybe higher ed isn't teaching your Arduino classes, your additive manufacturing classes. Maybe they're not teaching all the things that we're teaching that are the newer technologies or VR. But again, we have a very important job to do, and that's to expose people to those technologies, because whether you're a gig worker or whether you're working in a large corporation, you need those skills. So I guess I would say collaborating with a lot of pre-existing and foundational organizations in our area.
So I'm also wondering to ask you guys, I mean, when I came on board at CLC in 2012, which is when a lot of you were just starting some of the makerspaces, Westport Public Library, of course, was known for their large maker movement, and we hosted a trend spotting and it was, at that time, everybody was really focused on 3D printing. And so I'm wondering if this is still the case, and if not, what's changed?
All right. So the most used device is also one of the scariest to me, is our laser. I think most of the hackerspaces I've been to have had a laser fire. We've been fortunate not to have one, or better yet, the makerspaces have a laser that's been donated that was on fire. I think JR, one of your first lasers was one that was caught fire and you guys rebuilt it, right?
Yeah, we've been donated a few burnt lasers.
Yeah. So the laser is the most popular thing. The CNC router, the wood shop. You know, we have a very small space. I've lost count. We have over 20 3D printers. Probably the coolest technology in 3D printing is the resin printers. It's messy. During COVID, we had donations pour in, and the hospital asked us to help with the nasal pharyngeal swab project. So they were worried about a shortage. So like all the makerspaces were making face shields. You know, we made about 9,000. We handled hospitals from Queens to Bridgeport. 100 volunteers. It was amazing, the crew. But the hospital reached out to us and asked us to do a 3D printing project to make the swabs. And I'm not going to share screens, but Form Labs, we spent $6,000 on the first printer. Another member had one. They bought 3 more. So we built about a $25,000 lab at the Danbury Hospital Nuance Research Center, where we could make over 1,000 swabs a day. So 3D printing, resin printing is amazing. The quality, this piece, I keep it around, but it's overdone. The quality we're getting from the resin printers, this piece looks injected, molded. You can read the words on it. This is off a $200 printer called an Elgu Mars. And the resin's like 30 bucks for a bottle. And I overcured this. I put it out in the sun too long. I forgot about it, but I keep it on my desk. So 3D printing is still a big thing. CNC routers, yeah, then the lasers. So,
JR, Devra, do you have anything to add around what about 3D printing or what's changed?
So I'll just jump in really quickly. I decided to set us up as a center of excellence for additive manufacturing 3D printing. I have over 40 different types of units, and I have big Connex, small ones. I have 12 rays. I've, go in every modality. My feeling, what's really important is that federal money came to a lot of the community colleges and state colleges to set up manufacturing facilities. In my opinion, this is 20, 30 years too late. We should have been pushing people in this direction before. I'm looking ahead. I don't want that to happen as we transition our technologies to the newer technologies. So I describe MakerspaceCT as the intersection between traditional skills and the newer technologies. So I think they're very critical. All these things that JR and Mike have and we have, they're all very critical, and they're all pieces of the future. And, I don't want us to be looking backwards again or be caught in the chance where manufacturers are going to move out of Connecticut because of different tax structures and the fact that we don't have a workforce pipeline that's educated in the newer technologies.
And that leads me to my next, oh, sorry. Well, maybe JR, do you mind? I was going to piggyback as Devra said something about workforce development. I was going to say that I've been reading a lot about the connection between the maker movement and workforce development. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how makerspaces support that. And JR, if you wanted to respond to my previous question as well, that's fine. Sorry.
No problem. I think just to the previous question is, 3D printing is awesome because it's so direct. And, you're either additively doing things or you're removing materials. A lot of time removing materials has just got a lot more complexity. But we have seen that although there's a big contingent that is really excited about the additive, that all the little tiny areas attract a lot of attention. And so, for example, at the very beginning, we had one sewing machine and it didn't see a lot of attention because it was one sewing machine. But then as we added sergers and a heavy duty machine and a nice big table for people to work at, we found that there was a community that came out and was enthusiastic and engaged around that we hadn't known was there. So I think that there, to the question specifically of, is that where all the enthusiasm is? I think it's still it's a center point, but there's a lot of pockets of enthusiasm. And because we are places of variety, we find a variety of enthusiasm. And I've lost the next question.
It was about workforce development.
And just to say, so we didn't start from a place of focusing on workforce development as our primary goal, but we have, we've been more focused on entrepreneurship, but we have been realizing that our badging system, we're really primed to help people move into that environment. Yep. And so there's the Woodworking Careers Alliance. We've been working at getting our woodworking shop aligned with those credentials. There's NIMS for metalworking, and we've been working at getting those credentials implemented. And we have something called Foundations of Fabrication, which is not certified by any external body, but has a certificate at the end that we are self-issuing. And those are all things that we hope will have resonance with people who are employing.
Mike or Devra, do you want to comment on the connection between makerspaces and workforce development?
Sure. All of our spaces are teaching CAD. I don't know what you guys have settled on, but we're still going with Fusion 360. So we started out teaching Fusion 360. Now we want to formalize it and go for the user certificate that's offered by the company, the test. We've done a lot of, one-on-one mentoring and training. We want to formalize that. AWS, Red Hat, bring in certification programs to the space. One of my business partners is actually teaching the Yukon Full Stack Bootcamp, which is front-end and back-end web development. And we're going to move that to Danbury. He's doing that with Yukon the past 2 semesters, and we're going to bring that to Danbury. We're also partnered with Western Connecticut State University in Naugatuck and working on programs that we can bring in that dovetail what they don't do. But I agree with Devra. They took shop out of the schools, and that was a crime. Okay, that was a crime against humanity. My daughter went through a STEM school in Danbury, and there was a 6th grader that couldn't turn a screwdriver. This is awful. Don't even get me started on STEM, training. I'm 100% with you.
So it might even not be workforce development. It might be life skills. So
yeah, and I'd like to address that just a little bit and say, that I'm very much, about that right now. And it was bred out of observation and seeing what's going on and where we're headed and how our typical educational systems weren't necessarily aligning with where the jobs were. And that was what brought me to saying, I have a responsibility to do something. Didn't think that way initially, but I have a responsibility to get this information to as many people as possible. But I'm just going to take it a step farther, Jennifer, if I may, and talk about my responsibility and the library's responsibility to workforce development, because I think we have to highlight and align career pathways, and these are new career pathways. And I see it much like you see a landing strip in an airport with the lights on the side, that it's up to us and you guys to start, as soon as you get these people, to highlight pathways, alternative pathways, what skills they need, what equipment, what is life going to be like? What kind of a quality of life then can people expect? What kind of money, and what are tangential aspects to that that lead to other careers? So I feel very, very strongly like libraries used to help people out with reading, books, all sorts of things that added a richness to our life. I believe that this is another place where libraries have to add a richness to people moving forward, and you guys are preparing them. And I guess I'm going to go a step farther and say it's really important for you to have good equipment, a good 3D printer, not something that somebody threw out and you got a grant and yada, 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 to spark enthusiasm, to encourage people, to bring that curiosity to God knows what they're going to create. It's important for you guys to continue to invest in it, but further, I think you guys need to be the light to those pathways that we teach people at the youngest age possible, what is possible.
So that's, I think, really heads into, what advice do you have for libraries? I think we had this topic, particularly for our public libraries, worried that there was a period of investment. And with COVID, that put a pause on it, maybe made people think that it was a been there, done that. What are we going to do to repurpose our makerspace? And I really love, Devra, how you tied it into the fact that libraries have traditionally supported non-traditional learners and learners of all ages and all types. So I guess I'm going to say, what kind of advice do you have for libraries as they look to increase usage of their makerspaces, or maybe look at their makerspaces or develop makerspaces with new eyes and not just COVID-19 blinders? What kind of thoughts do you have?
Well, one thought I have is that if you're a decision maker at the library management level, you should encourage your staff to be involved in the community makerspaces and resources around. I have seen before where equipment gets purchased, perhaps, but there hasn't been the experience, or there hasn't been the time in the saddle with some of that equipment to take full advantage of it. And so by being part of a community, the library will be a better switchboard, able to direct people to other resources, the various community resources around the library, which I think is ultimately, the libraries are most likely not to be the full set of factory level tools that maybe Devra or I or Mike would have, but can give people that first taste as an on-ramp and send them to the right place. And the best way to do that is for us to be engaging in many different ways, whether co-hosting events or just inviting each other over to work on some project.
Collaboration, I think you're talking about that. I think I put that in the chat that I can't wait. We visited Danbury Hackerspace a couple times. I know that we've had visits to CT, MakerspaceCT, and I think JR, we've also been to MakeHaven. But I'm looking forward to the time we can coordinate some of those visits again. And maybe even in the meantime, do them virtually because we do have a maker roundtable, which has been a little bit, in hiatus. So let me ask if there's any other ideas from Devra or Mike around what should our libraries and librarians be thinking of? And maybe even this afternoon as they go shopping with our vendors and start looking at what's out there, what kinds of things should they be looking at?
So we've been fortunate. I've had it by a rough count, at least 50 libraries have come through our space. And I know most of you have gone to Westport as well. So definitely I agree with JR. Reach out to the hackerspaces. We saw this during COVID. All of the hackerspaces and makerspaces in the state want to help, and I'm a library rat. I grew up in the Danbury library. I walked from my school, which is 2 blocks away, and my mom would pick me up when they closed at the library. So I'm back home. This is my home. So we want to help. I volunteer to teach a ton of classes. A lot of my people help. Reach out to them. And before you pull the trigger on buying anything, I echo that with JR. Reach out to the local makerspace because they can give you some real clear direction on what to buy and what not to buy, and advise, help you there. resources, they're amazing, for teaching classes, for things like that. Go visit and partner with the local makerspaces. I mean, we're ironically in the building, but if I worked at a library and I was trying to figure out how to do all this stuff, I would, partner with a local makerspace, without a doubt.
Devra?
So, yeah, I guess my advice, I echo all that about equipment and knowledge and everything at the makerspaces, but my advice is for the libraries that are in schools and those that are public, to see yourself as the first stop in creating a whole new culture around how we live and what we do for work. I really encourage, because I think we are going to be rolling open states, and as I said before, manufacturing and aerospace, and we really have to support our youth in thinking. They're so much smarter than when I grew up in the 60s, about what they want to do. And there's so much more information, and I'm so envious. But nonetheless, there's just better information about everything and to make decisions. And I think the libraries are our first step in putting together, and I really mean it when I say pathways on paper, like in this type of career, you can go here, and I really mean utilizing all these maker equipment and tools and things in the library to highlight options. And I think that the libraries are the first step in getting us to begin to think and train our youth with intention about what they want to do.
Thank you. I think that we could talk all afternoon. You all are so intriguing, interesting, and I'm sure that you'll be hearing from a lot of libraries. Hopefully CLC will be coordinating things, whether it's through our Maker Roundtable or just through CLC again. I love the idea, Devra, that you're talking about pathways, and that and I think that image came up several times, sort of like the airport runway, lighting the way. And I think it's really resonates with me, because I was just chatting with some younger friends, and they were really using that word about pathway, thinking about their career pathways and recognizing that they were, that their professional pathway may not be a career the way I had a career or was thinking about careers. They were thinking pathways and how we illuminate them. So I am going to just thank our panel again, J.R. Logan, Mike, I'm just going to misspell your name, Mike, Kaltschnee, and Devra Sisitsky for joining us. And with Keohane here, and
we didn't make it easy, Mike and I.
No.
I know. So anyway, but I just wanted to thank you all. I wanted to just invite, I know we'll have follow-up information. You can link to their makerspaces and information about them on the event page. And at this point, I want to remind you that we're opening it up for our vendor expo. We're very excited to have a variety of all of our new vendors on our supplies bid being here. That includes Maker and Steam, but also more traditional library supplies. And I wanted to remind you to, again, on that hop-in orientation, that you're going to want to click on Expo on the left-hand side, and you're going to want to make sure that when you visit vendors that you click on the blue Share Audio and Video button to video chat with them. And you're also going to want to toggle on your right side from the chat box that we have right now to the chat box to offer. And that's going to give you the opportunity, and it's important so the vendors know that you visited them. Now, I want to also thank the CLC staff, particularly Amanda Stern. Amanda did a lot of work to not only help our vendors create the best experience they have, and all of you are librarians, you know what that's like, training people on a new software platform, and Amanda did that. I also worked with them to get the most out of the vendor event. I'm hoping also that you took advantage of the tools and the training materials that Amanda sent you as attendees to get the most out of the vendor experience and to use it just like you would and take advantage of it and really get a chance to visit with all the vendors. Again, thank you all for joining us. I think Amanda's going to turn us off and we can go to the Vendor Expo. Thank you, JR. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Devra. See you soon.